Give it back to me. Excellent. All right. So to everybody who has joined us now, thank you very, very much for joining. My name is Tom. I work for a company called LightRun. I run developer relations here, and this is our second developer productivity masterclass. We'll start in just a few minutes when everybody's kind of joining up, and we'll make sure the room is a bit more full. About 2 or 3 minutes after the hour, we'll get going. I'd like to thank all of my guests, Ryan, Anton, Harish, and Mark, for joining me today. If anyone has to drop off in the middle or has to, I don't know, do anything else during the time of this session, we will both send a recording and a link to a summary article once this webinar, this masterclass is finished. Just to give you a general sense of what's going on today, we have a list of questions that the panelists have reviewed and have gracefully agreed to answer. If you have any of your own questions during the webinar, feel free to use the Q&A button. It should be right here on the bottom. Click it, add the questions. I'll have a block of time at the end to answer everything. Let's wait 1 more minute, 2 more minutes, and then we'll get going. Grab a coffee, settle in, grab a beer maybe. Is it beer time anywhere? It's about 6 p.m. where I am. So I think that's beer time. So, oh, look at you, Anton, already out. I only have my solo cup. It's disposable. It's not very energy efficient or whatever, but it's very tasty. So a tiny bit of context to people who are joining us right now. I see a lot of people coming into the room. Very happy to see you all. I think that I'm going to do a bit of housekeeping now, and then we're going to get started. So first and foremost, my name is Tom. I work for a company called LightRun. I do developer relations here. LightRun is a developer observability platform. We allow you to add logs, metrics, traces, and snapshots in real time to dev, production, staging, CI, basically everywhere you runtime runs, we run. And this is the very last pitch you will hear from me during this session. If you want to use the product, it's right here, lightrun.com/free. We have a free tier on the website. Feel free to use it, but this is not why we have gathered here today. We have gathered here today to talk about developer productivity. This kind of sometimes misunderstood, oftentimes how to implement and how to measure practice inside many software organizations. We have experts from a bunch of very leading companies here today. And the way this session is going to go is as follows. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to let each of our guests introduce themselves, talk a little bit about who they are, where they come from, what they do for a living, and why they love developer productivity. And then we're going to jump right into the session. We're going to do about 40 to 45 minutes of Q&A. And then at the end, I'm going to leave room for the audience to have their own Q&A. I have a bunch of requests from everyone. Please, there's a chat button on the bottom. Feel free to use it. Tell us who you are, where you come from, what you like to eat for breakfast. Not really, but like just kind of introduce yourself. Have fun in the chat. It's a great place to meet people. If you have any questions that you want answered by the end of this session, please use the Q&A button right here on the bottom. If you want to direct the question to a person, please just say that person's name so I know which person to direct the question to. Otherwise, I will randomly choose people from the room people from the panel to answer the question. All right, I think we can get started. Ryan, why don't you start? Let us know who you are.
Thanks, Tom. Hey, everyone, I'm Ryan Menezes. I'm a software engineering manager here at Meta. I've been doing this job for a little over 4 years. Before that, I was an engineer in the same developer experience, developer tooling space here. Nowadays, my team, I support a team of overall about 25 people. We're part of a broader developer experience org that's a centralized org that's about 70, 80 people. And then that is part of an even broader developer infrastructure org here, which is hundreds of engineers who work on developer tooling for engineers here at Meta.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ryan. Anton, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Anton. I'm a developer advocate at JetBrains. 4.5 years now, joined the company in 2018. Basically, we are the company who build the tools that a lot of developers use, not only the IDEs, but also Teamware. And well, it happened that we also built a programming language which is very famous for Android development, but not only. And well, I'm a developer advocate on that team. Before that, I spent quite a few years in a small startup called Zero Turnaround, building tools also for developers. like shareable and extrable, a profiler, as a developer and as a product manager as well. And well, about 20 years ago, I started programming in Java, and that was so long time ago, I cannot remember it much.
It's a very good introduction, Anton. Harish, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Harish Jayakumar. I am a director of global app mod solutions here at Google. And so I've been here about 2.5 years right now, and I lead the solutions team. So as part of solutions, I work with a lot of our customers, looking at their problems, starting with the customer problem coming in. And then we try to see how we can solve them using our application modernization products like GKE, the serverless Cloud Run, Anthos, and all those products associated with that. Before that, for about 4 years, I was with Docker, where I was also a solutions engineer, and then I led the global solutions engineering team there as well for about 4 years, where I also worked on a lot of this. My career started as a developer, although I don't do active development right now. As part of my role, I still talk a lot with developers, and most of our tools on the app mod solutions like Cloud Build and stuff are also related to developers. So I'm really, really looking forward to the session. So thank you for having me here.
Definitely. And Mark, last but not least, tell us a little bit about who you are and what is this green bag that you work for?
Yeah, so I'm Mark Cote. I'm Senior Manager of Developer Infrastructure at Shopify. I've been at Shopify about 3.5 years, leading right now, depending on how you count it, about 8 teams. We form half of a bigger organization called Developer Acceleration. Before that, I was at Mozilla for about 8 years doing similar things. The team changed names a bunch of times, but it was automation and tooling and general developer experience. I started there as a senior engineer and then moved into management there. And before that, I worked at a few different startups here in Montreal, and that's where I got my start in this space and developer experience when I was working for a small telecom startup doing build systems and automation, that kind of thing. Very excited to be here as well.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you to all the panelists who are here. A tiny bit about me. My name is Tom. Again, I run developer relations here at LightRun. I'm a former site reliability engineer. And despite the fact that I now talk for a living, I also coded for a living for a distinct period of my professional life. I want to mention 2 things before everyone kind of jumps into the Q&A session. First of all, if you talk on the chat, make sure that you select to everyone. Otherwise, only us, the panelists, can see you. That's not great. So choose not host and panelist, but everyone. And the second thing, if you have any questions during the actual session, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. Please, please, please use it. It's always great to have questions at the end that are not pre-populated by myself. Yeah, let's just get started. The way it's going to go is I'm going to ask questions and I'm going to direct them to specific people. Once that person is finished talking, I'm going to direct the question to the next person. Guys, if you want to riff off one another, please feel free to do so. That's best when it's interactive. So let's get started with the first questions. How can you get a developer productivity program or process going? Specifically, how do you convince the stakeholders at your company to adopt the tools and methodology across the organization? And I think Mark, being head of one of the developer productivity groups in Shopify, will have a lot to say about that.
Sure, yeah. So there's a lot of early wins for a company that doesn't have like a proper productivity program. The obvious one is like CI/CD. Even if you have that working off the side of somebody's desk, even just having 1 or 2 developers concentrating on the system can make a massive difference in terms of reliability and speed. Some like same kind of thing with build systems, observability. There's a lot of like wins that can be gotten right away that have just clear impact and value. And if you get those things right, that demonstrates an early ROI for your engineers who aren't, making the product work, aren't directly bringing in money. But that ROI will build trust for more advanced tooling, like automated development environments, canary deploys, all that extra kind of good stuff that you don't necessarily need right away, but becomes super valuable as you grow. A lot of this is really subject to like overall company or at least engineering culture, though I found, like how much the company values adaptability, the idea of global maxima over local maxima, building for the long term, all that stuff will really influence like your org's success. So I actually have like an example. When I joined Shopify 3.5 years ago, I was leading the mobile tooling team, which is now one of a bunch of teams that reports up into me. And they had just launched a deployment system called Ship It Mobile. And it was a bit controversial when they first proposed this idea, because developers had to kind of change things in their workflows to automate it. Meant that they had to streamline things and work in a all in the same kind of way. So like their branching model, for example, we had to change that. But Shift Mobile was built on the success of this really great Mac OS CI infrastructure that the team had built earlier, like that year or the year before, and it was really successful. So the team used that trust to take a risk with a new process, and then it quickly showed its value, and now it's been the default for several years. People can't imagine shipping without it anymore.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think the next person should be Harish. Do you want to take this away?
Sure. I think Mark brought some great points. The way I would kind of answer this is to first take a step back. What is important is to start, in my opinion, is to start with the end state in mind. What are we first looking for when we talk about developer productivity? And as if you just simply Google it, you'll see there's been studies done about this for decades, right? And they came back and said, guess what? There's not this one metric. So the question is, are we trying to get better numbers as an output, be it whatever your business is tracking, or are we helping to try to get the developers? Ideally, we want them to be connected. And one of the things is, some of you must already know that every year we publish this report called the DORA report, so State of DevOps report. And basically, it talks to a bunch of folks and it gets you these inputs around how to improve your developer cycle. Now, one of the things that came out from there is that it shows that excellence in software delivery and operational performance can actually be tied, and it does drive organizational performance and technological transformations. And so one of the things that came out from there was, what are the things you want to focus on is, like Mark's point on the culture, less rework, less burnout, less manual work. How can we automate these things? So we need to be able to see those and be able to connect them to the metrics that you care about, like deployment frequency, lead time for changes, and things like that. And I think that's the most important key part of this. And to be very honest, developers really know. They know what it is to do this. So one of the most important things as leaders we could do is take a step back and just ask them. Take the time. A Friday afternoon or a Tuesday morning like this is, we keep talking about pushing and building features, but we need to be able to step back and think it's not like an auto factory line. And even if we look at it like an assembly line, what is it in that line we need to improve, which will make the developer's life much better? So something like we tried this with a couple of customers, like a day of the developer happiness program, where we just sit down and we ask them what it is and treat that happiness program itself, like a product of features. What are the things that we need, and come back and go through that cycle on that. So how could you do that is again, DORA I talked about is a great place to start. We've done some research on this, and you'll also hear the concepts of OODA, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. I actually think you could apply this even to your life and to your proportion. But for example, let's take the Log4j that came out. Observe. You probably first observed it on Twitter. You heard about it, and then you were oriented. Okay, great. Where are we running this? Where is going on? And then you decide what you want to do. Should we patch it? Should we shut it down? And then you act on it. And then you start over. It's actually basically a loop on this, and then you observe after that. So if you actually look at it, you can actually apply for those things. That's how I would do as the how when you want to design this program, is to follow such a cycle as well.
Thank you very much, Harish. I think we should move on to Anton. Folks, if you can please make sure to kind of keep your answers short and to the point, because we're really short on time. We have a bunch more stuff to go through. So Anton, please take it away. As a reminder to everybody, as a reminder is not a thing. As a reminder to everybody in the room, the question was developer productivity programs. How do you get this going? How do you convince the stakeholders? How do you make this a tenant in your company? Anton, tell us your tale.
All right. Actually, it very much resonated with me what Harish was saying about the developer happiness. I couldn't think of this in any better way. But I think what I have seen before is that in many companies, the productivity program as such was kind of a direction by the management. Hey, let's be more productive. And but this is something that will definitely miss some of the key points for the developer happiness. And like on a larger scale, like the practices, what the developers use are unknown to the management anyway. So like you probably should ask the question, like what means to be more productive? like to deliver features faster, that's about the process. Or to feel productive, to remove the ceremony around, the daily tasks that developers do. So for instance, we were developing this JRebel tool for Java developers to cut out this unwanted time for building and redeploying apps, especially big monoliths, right? Which takes time to build, which takes time to start, which takes time to navigate through the session to get to the screen where you have made the change. So that's the ceremony. This is not the productive time that the developer spends on the application or on the project, right? The productive time is when he actually does something with the hands, like writes the code and maybe tests the application.
Thank you very much, Anton. Just to answer a quick question from the chat, yes, the recording will be shared with everyone who has signed up to the lecture, to the webinars, to the masterclass. Words are difficult. To the masterclass once the masterclass is over. Ryan, developer productivity programs, you don't know anything about that at all. So it's a great way to kind of get you into the discussion. Please tell us what you think.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Let me just set some context here for what my world looks like, and then maybe I can talk more about this with future questions. So the context here is like, I mentioned early on in my intro that we already have a large centralized investment. So you may think, well, that's not really a challenge you've had to deal with to go get buy-in. But I've actually had to deal with a lot. This is a pattern we're trying to repeat across other organizations at the company, where we want to go to the Messenger org, the ads org, the AI org, et cetera, and encourage them to invest in their own developer productivity. So the shape of it is different for the problem I'm dealing with here. But a lot of the kind of patterns and callouts that Mark, Anton, and Harish mentioned completely apply in this setting for me.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ryan. Let's move on to the next question, shall we? So the next question is a bit more on the actual practice of developer productivity programs inside your organization. Both Ryan and Mark are running large teams of developer productivity systems inside their company. So I'll focus on you two. The question is, what is the organizational structure of the developer productivity or experience organization in your company? Also, how do they kind of communicate with R&D? How are DevOps people, developer experience people, and their decisions make it into the R&D org in practice? Ryan, let's start with you actually to start. Let's carry on this thread.
Sounds good, Tom. Yeah, so I kind of described how we have the centralized org and then we collaborate with different orgs across the company. I'm just going to kind of tell the high level story. This is something I've done personally with Messenger as an org, ads as an org, a couple of other folks. The pattern is generally like people come to us because they're in pain. It's either that their employees are really unsatisfied, and it can even threaten like people leaving the team because they're so unhappy, or it's because their speed of developing and deploying or their ability to diagnose and fix issues in production is not high enough. So there's usually this initial impetus to feel like we have to do something. From there, echoing something Mark said earlier, we have to find a flagship win, like some big early thing that matters a lot, that matters both to the business and to the developers. And like Mark said, early on, there's usually some low-hanging fruit. So this is what establishes the relationships, builds trust, gives people a sense of momentum, shows everyone that we can actually win in this space. And then from there, I think it gets a little bit more interesting because you have to set up the incentives for long-term work in the area. So for us, that means we have to actually reward people in terms of performance evaluations, not just say like, this is something you have to carve out on the side with like out of your goodwill and it's not really contributing to features so you don't get credit. No, like we have to really, really reward it and make sure it's a priority in an engineering culture. I know I'm echoing a lot of what everyone has said already. I just think it's super true. So how do we reward this? One way we have it rewarded is with centralized teams. It's very clear that this is the charter of the team and it's your main full-time job. Another way we can reward this is with a concept like Google 20% time, or we have a concept here called better engineering, which is taking a chunk of your time and putting it toward these kind of efforts that just make the company better. And then another way we can reward it is through like having metrics that show us what the actual impact is. A lot of times, if you have the right metric to guide people's decisions and work, they can then kind of latch onto that and go be productive. Tom, you mentioned programs. The last thing I'll say is that there is absolutely space here to have a formal program or a set of processes as an organization to do reviews, to have executive sponsors, this can have a really big effect, especially in a large organization. But the way I think about this is that is sort of like the icing on the cake. It's what makes everything else work. And especially for someone like me, my job is a lot more focused on the fundamentals that let us have, the whole cake.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Indu, if you can please ask your question inside the Q&A session, that would be excellent, so we can then later on answer it. Mark, please take it away. How does the developer productivity or experience organization look like over at Shopify?
Yeah, so I think we're a little more centralized maybe than what Ryan was describing at Meta. We grew a lot, but we're not quite Meta size yet. So we're about 100 people inside of developer acceleration, and developer acceleration is split into two wings basically. So there's my group, developer infrastructure, which handles sort of like the development platform. I wrote a slightly outdated blog post now on the engineering blog at Shopify if you want some details about how I think about this. But generally, if you map the development process of from local coding to testing to deploy to managing your services, we kind of have teams that are responsible for each one of those aspects: environments, test infrastructure, deploys, production excellence, which handles our service catalog and service management. Mobile tooling specializes in mobile, and then we actually have an internal support team called developer success that is sort of like our first line of support for engineers who need something done, need help with their CI or deploys or something. They come to this group first and then get escalated to one of our engineering teams as necessary. The other wing of DevExcel is called Ruby and Rails infrastructure. So as some of you probably know, we're big on Ruby and Rails here at Shopify. We've got a massive investment in that, both internally and externally. So this group is basically here to make sure that Ruby and Rails continues to scale for our needs, and that we continue to build and invest in the broader community in a lot of different ways, through investing in real hardcore computer science compilers, stuff that I totally don't understand, and through securing supply chains and that sort of thing. So we've got a lot of initiatives in that area with Ruby and Rails at large. As Ryan said, a lot of our stuff comes directly from users, of course. So that's the best way to find out what people need, is to talk to them about their pain points. And this comes up sometimes just organically. People will wander into a channel and start chatting and talking about, do we have a thing that does this? Do we have a thing that does this? Or it'll happen in our support, as I mentioned, our internal support groups. We feel the pain directly there. They have actually a platform to collect all this data and insights from the support requests we come in, so we can help prioritize understand the patterns of support and figure out better ways of mitigating that. We also, of course, have more company-wide direction. There are certain initiatives that are very important to engineering leadership. It's a very engineering-driven company here. And then we actually do these developer happiness. Speaking of developer happiness, which got raised earlier, we do these surveys twice a year that are broad, quantitative, looks at how people are satisfied with different services, where they spend their time, where they feel the pain stuff. And then we also use that. All these are inputs into our roadmaps to decide what we need to invest in.
Thank you very much, Mark. I want to move to something that's less specific and more generic. So when we talk about tooling in major software companies, and that means everything that's above a 10, 20, 30 people team, the duplications will start to arise. People will start building the same thing over and over again, or at the very least start buying the same things from multiple departments without kind of having a concrete best practice or a set of best practices for those toolings, for those pieces of tooling. How do you keep your tooling aligned across the organization with so many domains to work on at any given time? That applies for everyone in the panel economy. They all work for very large companies. How do you reduce the duplication of the tools created? And I want to start with Harish, who, keep in mind, Harish works on application modernization, and he literally works with companies and with customers who are facing tooling decisions on a day-to-day basis. So Harish, please, how do you reduce duplication of tools?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think I'd like to go back over here is where I recently came up with, working with a couple of customers in the concept and how they're doing it well in the concept of developer autonomy. So we've seen that greater autonomy makes developers happier at work, even with frequent context switching and job complexity. So I use that, and when you take and build on top of that, my take on this is to let them build and pick the tools that they feel right about for their group, but with a set of guided guardrails, if I may. Now, this advantage comes because then you get strong ownership of this. So now they feel responsible for it end to end, not just about building the code, but also during deploy and actually running them as well. So even if they've been in production, they are ready to there's no blame game associated with this. And this is where I actually like the Netflix model, where it's more of a pluggable model, right? So they give you a prescriptive tool guidance, where it's like, hey, here's your set of tools that we feel you need end to end. But if you want to bring something outside of it, you own that. You have the ownership of it. If something breaks, you have to educate, you have to tell people, you have to do that. Even at Google, we give the flexibility, but I think, we're still sticking to Go, Java, and C++. I'm not sure. I don't think you can go use Rust, for example. So how do you reduce this? To your second part of the question, Tom, is I would say instead of focusing on the number of tools, it's actually the simple way to think about it is to think about the value that each tool brings to your developers. How can you improve the common knowledge and best practices? If it's a new tool, is it helping me with my metrics? What is it for? Or is it just for my promo? So tie these tools to the outcomes. When you bring a new tool, enable them, document them. That's one way to, I think, how you reduce these things. A perfect example is something that I use a lot with customer is what we call ACM, or Anthos Configuration Management, just based on the GitOps model, infrastructure as code, has helped a lot of our customers in these things when you start stepping outside of the developer realm.
Gotcha. And I want to take this to kind of from the more customer-facing approach to the more internal approach. So Ryan, Meta, we had a kind of an internal discussion before and trying to figure out exactly how to make the best out of these questions with the time that we have. Ryan, we talked a little bit about programming languages and basically how they affect the culture inside the engineering organization of the company. So tell us a little bit about Meta, the programming languages, and how that proliferates throughout the organization.
Yes, talking about programming languages is like a great concrete example here. So Harish, I love the point about developer autonomy, and it's basically trade-off between developer autonomy and support. Like if you want to reduce tool proliferation, you have to ask, like, why should anyone care? Like anyone who's not you. And the reason they should care is because eventually they're going to come back around and want support for the things that turn into something big or useful or critical to the company. And I've also gone down the road of like, if you introduce it, you support it. It's a tricky road because eventually, like, we have a centralized developer infrastructure org here that has, I don't know the exact numbers, but I believe it's 1,000+ engineers. So eventually, like, flaky tests in our CI suite eventually become the purview of like our CI team and my team as the developer experience team here. So ownership is a tricky thing, but it's the correct trade-off to look at. Programming languages, going back to that concreteness, we have a very interesting thing here where we don't really mandate which programming languages folks can use here. So we have all sorts of programming. We have Haskell, we have Go, we have OCaml in places, and this is all just in the infra world. One of the programming languages that I was involved with the engineers who introduced this year, one of the programming languages we recently introduced in the last few years is Rust. And this was literally the work of one engineer to start, who just kind of built it into our core tooling. That's the advantage of centralization, is we can quickly go develop something new. And then it was 2 engineers. We hired someone who was prominent in the Rust community to come join Meta and work on that here, as well as continue to contribute open source. And now Rust is used fairly broadly in command line tooling in particular here. And again, like, we didn't really tell people you must use Rust and not use Python or Go or whatever for command line tooling, but we did say, here's where we're going to put our support, and we made that very clear. So it's a very tricky balance, and I think we're all trying to figure this out. So even though I have a bunch of experience here, I still think it's like every time this comes up, we have to go look at it situationally and figure out what seems right.
So I think that the best way to kind of present not the counter opinion, but the way the other half lives is looking at Mark and their more kind of uniform stack of tooling. So going from everything all at once to something that's a bit more kind of centrally focused around one ecosystem, which is Ruby. Mark, how does that look like from your perspective over at Shopify?
Yeah, so it's not quite as clean cut as that. I just found out the other day that we use some Rust as well, like inside the Ruby and Rails infrastructure team, because of its like blazing speed and safety. So it's a little bit gray, but overall, yeah, like we are heavily, as I mentioned, invested in Ruby and Rails to the point that we have like a team of 40 people, whatever, to support that development. And I have to say, like, that makes my job a fair bit easier. Like green paths are just really valuable when you have a small developer productivity org. And I mean, honestly, all developer productivity orgs are pretty much small compared to their engineering, the engineering organizations they support. So we do have that kind of also mentality that, like, yes, if you can use other things, there are appropriate uses. We use Go as well. The data science department uses data science and engineering use Python extensively as well. But we do try to streamline around our front end development is done mainly in React as well. So it does, we can optimize certain things for that and make green paths while also making other things possible. So the Unix philosophy there. I was also going to mention that the communication is like a super important part of like trying to reduce this kind of duplication too, though. Like we try to get the projects that we're working on out there and communicate regularly to encourage collaboration, because you want other people to associate like your team with productivity tooling, like not so they can defer the work entirely to us, because lots of other teams are making their own, scratching their own itches. And I think that's totally necessary and totally fine. But they at least tend to consult with us, and then we can align our org's needs like strategically, right? Because eventually, as Ryan says, things will eventually often come and be our responsibility in the long run. So if we've helped them along the way, when the ownership gets muddied and we end up having to do something with it, at least we know we're going in roughly the same direction. And yeah, just talking to users and leaders of all kinds, like if they feel heard, they're not going to go off and just build stuff that are basically running at cross purposes to what your org is trying to do centrally.
Speaking of, that was totally unplanned, but that's a great sentence to end the question with, because speaking of central concerns, there's this concept well known in programming called yak-shaving, which is depending on who you ask, is the practice of working on things around the things instead of on the things themselves. Developer productivity by design is the practice of looking at a process, understanding how can we make it better, faster, more efficient, more peaceful, more streamlined for the people who we love and work around us on the computers and terminals right across the room. So there's a big difference between meta work, understanding what a process needs to look like and figuring out what needs to happen, and yak-shaving, which is again working on the things around the thing, which doesn't actually produce any output. They don't further the game along, they just kind of put you in place and allow you to feel as if you're working. The question of what is yak-shaving in any context, and more than that, how to separate yak-shaving from actual meta work on a process. I think in the world of developer productivity, it's pretty much a constant fight. It's a constant battle between those two concepts. Anton, I think you had a very good example to give in this regard. Was kind of how can we differentiate it and make sure that we work on things that are actually moving the needle ahead?
Okay, I can think of two examples here from a developer point of view. Is when you write code, you have completed the task, the application works, the test coverage is good, and then the developer says, hey, I want to refactor it because the code doesn't look nice. It should be nicer, it should be cleaner, and cleaner doesn't have any metrics to it, right? Or the other one is about performance optimization. Then you start asking the question, why? Is it really critical? Is it something that your SLA requires? Is it a critical performance path that will hit the whole system availability or whatever? So this is something that is probably hard to distinguish immediately, but I think if you have a good metrics like in place, like the test coverage, static analysis, dynamic analysis, whatever else for the code, if it's good, like you should stop refactoring. Like there is no good reason, right, to make the code looks nicer. Maybe there could be an argument, hey, I want to extend this system further, but this is something for the future. Like you probably should account this time for the next task before you start with it. But current task is complete. You are done. Deliver what you have done. right? And same with the performance. Like if we collect the performance metrics in CI, in staging, if we monitor our application during development, that's pretty much the same practice as with static analysis, right? We can have performance tests running automatically and collecting all the metrics and have the telemetry in our monitoring system. Then we can react. Yes, the performance degraded. We should fix something, right? This is where it stops.
Okay, and I think that going from all of the kind of how do you say, the more individual perspective, kind of the more IC perspective of the topic, I'd like to take it kind of back to Harish for the more, let's say, again, organizational perspective. What can we do from the more on the kind of on the team level to make sure that yak-shaving is a thing of the past?
Yeah, Tom, my answer for this is going to be, might consider very dumb, but it's very simple. It's just good documentation. We've actually found, even through research, that just good documentation is very foundational for successfully implementing these capabilities. In fact, it's actually been proven that with quality documentation, you're 2.4 times more likely to see better software delivery and operational performance as well. So even simply just recording and assessing these information about these internal systems is a critical part of the technical work. So, teams with these good documentation, they deliver software faster and more reliable than those with poor documentation. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't have to be like this picture perfect documentation. Even simple improvements to documentation quality can have, reduce the yak-shaving fees and have a good quality and positive direct impact on performance.
I really like the approach of the documentation part. I also am a very large documentarian. I always felt that this is the core of everything. I write a lot. I think the developers who write are often just, I don't like the term 10x developer. It's too mushy for me. But if you can have a skill that's a multiplier as a developer, writing definitely is much more than better algorithmic skills, stuff like that. Communicating well in large organizations makes a lot of sense. We don't have a lot more time, so I do want to move over to the next question, which is kind of more war story like, which is give an example of a methodology or a set of tools you decided to implement and the reasons behind it. Tell us also what type of impact they brought to the organization. Mark, why don't you start?
Sure. Yeah. So first, I mean, the way that this is phrased makes it sound like this would have been my decision entirely. And I want to say that we get ideas from all over the places, and it's often a collaborative effort to decide what we're working on for our roadmaps and everything. So I'll modify the question to a tool that we collectively in DevInfra decided to implement. So yeah, one of the biggest initiatives that we've done in the last few years is move towards cloud development environments. We have something called Spin. There's actually going to be like a trifecta of blog posts coming out in the next little while, some history, some details and stuff around what we did. To try to keep it as short as possible. Basically, prior to Spin, everyone relied on a local tool called Dev. It's a big Ruby script. It's pretty amazing. When people would come to Shopify, they would be blown away by how much work this one app would do to get everything set up, your dependencies, configuring and starting up their backing services like MySQL and Redis, and shortcuts to starting local servers and running tests and that sort of thing. But it really it hit a limit at some point with our majestic monolith being just so huge. It would take close to an hour to bootstrap the whole thing, and that's assuming that you had kind of a new system, that you hadn't had some sort of configuration drift. And over time, yeah, you get conflicting system libraries, or somebody has a local dependency, forgets to add it to a package file, somebody else comes, and invariably, because we have this centralized tool, they will come to us and say, well, Dev's broken. We're no, it's not. It's something in your configuration here. But there was a lot of frustration for them, a lot of frustration for us, and a lot of time spent. So we flipped over to creating a cloud environment. We did a lot of experimentation and iterations on what's the best way, what are the ergonomics like, because we really built it from scratch to customize for Shopify's use case. Code Spaces is really neat, but we wanted something that was a little more just tailored to our approach. And we're in a really good state now. We've got a lot of the company using it. You can reliably get an instance, even of our big monoliths, within a few minutes. With our smaller services, it's in less than a minute. And there's all kinds of extra value added as well, of just not having the the primary goal is to have a clean working environment ready for you really quickly. But now we can share things. You can spin up multiple environments to try different things at the same time, share your URLs with like product managers who may not be that technical, but could, want to inspect what you're working on right now and take notes on things and do reviews. And finally, we're using this environment as like a focal point for developer ergonomics to add like more context around the code and the apps you're working on. And that's a lot easier with like a centrally managed environment. So again, take a look out for our blog post that'll be coming out with lots more details.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I think the folks from the internal folks from Shopify who are joining the masterclass are now posting links by Mark in the chat, which is awesome. Nice way of delivering spies into the conversation, Mark. I love it.
My fan club. Thank you, guys.
Yes, your fan club, definitely your fan club. Just to make a quick comment, I'm seeing all the questions in the chat and in the Q&A. At 10 to the hour, we'll stop and kind of do the Q&A part, but let's carry on. Again, the question was, or is, I never stopped, give them an example of a methodology or sort of tools you decided to implement and the reasons behind it and what type of impact they brought to the organization. Ryan, why don't you take the next version of the answer?
Sounds good. I actually have an example related to yak-shaving, funnily enough.
Yes.
So this is when I was doing the yak-shaving, even better. So this was a few years ago. What reminded me of this is I'm visiting Seattle right now, specifically mainly to like see a friend of mine. This is someone who used to be reporting to me within my team a few years ago, and since then he moved on to another team here. And but we remain pretty good friends. So a few years ago, while he was within my team, he came up with this proposal to rebuild from scratch on top of internal tooling a Maven proxying service that we were previously like using an external like off-the-shelf solution for. Now, when I first heard this, I was like, this is a terrible idea. Why would you not use something off the shelf? Why would you rewrite this? I always have been super skeptical of rewrites. And honestly, I didn't really change my mind on that until it was fully delivered and it worked. But what I found useful here was to back out like what was our shared intent. Because for me, it was like I knew there was pain around managing the off-the-shelf solution in our internal infrastructure. There was pain around disaster recovery setup and just issues with the service being reliable. We only used a small slice of the service's functionality, and everything else that it offered was just kind of like overhead that we didn't need. So I knew that, and I was really in the mindset of like, let's go fix all of those symptoms. And this engineer in my team kind of made the point that like, maybe if we can rewrite this on top of standard internal infra, maybe it'll work, maybe it'll be super stable, maybe we won't need to spend all our time dealing with the symptoms here. And then I was also kind of worried, to be honest, like, what if this project fails? Like, what about his career and like his success and how it reflects on me as the manager, right? It's hard not to have those concerns. But once I understood the common intent that we had, it became really clear we had to at least give this a bet. And so the project for him was to take on this bet. And if it failed in the right way, that was a success, if that makes sense. Also, if it succeeds, that was an even bigger success. So just kind of backing away from the day-to-day activity and the stressors and the yak-shaving and going to like, what are we trying to go get done, helped us take the bet, and it worked out fabulously. Like this rewrite, as skeptical as I am of rewrites and building something in-house, we really needed something very minimal here. There was a lot of good infra to build on top of here internally. And the rewrite has been extremely stable for like years now, requiring like minimum maintenance and kind of overhead. So just that introduction of like this new tool here, I think it's worth taking risks, I guess is one takeaway. I think it's worth it looking at even everything I'm doing right now and saying, hold on a second, what if literally everything I'm doing right now is yak-shaving and there's something deeper to go figure out? It's kind of nice to get in that mindset.
I really like kind of the realizations that you had during the process. And generally speaking, looking at things, no, it is true though. Like you look at something and it doesn't kind of make sense. You're trying to figure out what does make sense. And throughout this process of exploration, you come, which some of it I think might be constituted as yak-shaving. This process of exploration makes a whole lot of sense. One thing that's really interesting to me is speaking of perspectives, is how to kind of look at the system and say, it doesn't make sense. And I think Anton, being around JetBrains in the time Kotlin when it was introduced and looking at the state of Java at the time, might have some interesting things to say about when things are just not up to par and it's about time we make a difference. Anton.
Yeah, we are kind of an interesting company that we built. Our products are actually tools for developers, and we sometimes need tools to build the tools for developers. So there is a lot of meta in that. So if you talk about Kotlin 2010, well, that if you recall, that was the time when Oracle acquired Sun Microsystems, and Java development pace wasn't that high at all, and we were waiting for Java 7 to appear. We were waiting for lambdas to get into Java, and we didn't get them at the end. But well, we did, but in Java 8 actually. So in 2010, a lot of other companies were thinking, hey, we don't know what will happen to Java. We don't know how fast it will be developed by Oracle, and let's build our own language. And actually, some languages were announced that were already developed for some time somewhere, like behind the closed doors, like Gozu, for instance, and a lot of other languages were announced, like Kotlin, Phantom, Ceylan, and so on. But for JetBrains, it was mostly like a brand project, right? Let's build something cool, and everybody will see how that we are building something cool. Hence, the products that we build are cool as well, and they are probably productive. Then it's good to use them, and so on. So it was kind of invented to drive sales indirectly, in a way. But what happened is that, like, our goal was to build a better Java for ourselves, to feel better, to feel more productive. And like the main thing about being productive for the developer, like personally, is to kind of feel that, hey, I'm productive today. I feel good. Like there's nothing in the way. There is no ceremony about like what I'm doing, especially around writing the code. So Kotlin was about this. The whole idea was about this. And today we think about getting more, value adds into the language. Of course, they were built like in the beginning in the design, but today we are kind of investing more and more into multi-platform nature of Kotlin, thinking of more language features that would bring in more safety for large projects, for better maintenance, and so on.
Thank you, Anton. And Harish, I'm sorry, I think I'm going to skip your answer for this one because we do have a lot of answers in the Q&A. I'd like to get to that, so we'll start a little bit earlier. I'm going to leave 2 minutes at the end to let our fine panelists say a little bit of something about themselves and what they're working on currently. Let's take the first question of the Q&A. Sorry for everybody who wrote in the chat. I asked to ask in the Q&A. We need to have some order in this house. So the first question by Sumia Viswanathan is, have you made wholesale changes from one workflow to another, i.e. fundamentally retool the build infrastructure or change the source, the SEM, from something old to new? Anybody from the panelists want to take this specifically? Anybody has a concrete answer?
Good. I guess we've done it a few times.
Yeah. So Mark, what's your opinion of that entire thing?
Yeah, well, so most recently this cloud-based environment, I would say, is an excellent example of that. We've like lifted everybody from like not everybody, it's an ongoing transition, but there's a lot of people away from like local development to cloud environment. And it was a little bit shaky at times. Like it's a brand new thing. We were having infrastructure kinks to work out, various other things. But I think what I mentioned early on about building trust with the organization, I think if we had done that and nobody knew who we were, that this team didn't already have amazing things in place, it would have been a little bit more of a difficult sell, I think. But the fact that like some of our early adopters really found value in it, the ones who were a little bit more willing to put up with the little bit of shakiness early on, along with the general organizational trust we have, meant that like we were able to get past a few rough spots. And now like there's more and more people I see commenting about just how it's changed everything about how they work, including some people who started off kind of skeptical about it, who would come to us like, I'm not sure if do we have to use this? And now they're telling other people about how great the system is. So yeah, it's difficult. You got to kind of stick with, there's going to be hard parts in any sort of transition. You got to continue and kind of get through and solidify your confidence in the end goal. And but if you're making the progress and you've got the buy-in from the organization, then you can accomplish great things in big migrations.
Thank you very much, Mark. Any other comments on this question before moving to the next one? Anybody? Workflow changes, wholesale changes, retail changes? Yes, Ryan, tell us about wholesale changes, please.
Yes, sure. Yeah, we've done this a lot at Meta. So we've changed out our source control system, we've changed out our build tooling, et cetera. I also want to highlight that this is like within reach for like anyone, right? Like when I was an engineer on the messaging infra team, I realized that the way we were writing MapReduce jobs for like maintaining our data was just super unscalable. And so I invented a tool, and I had to kind of advocate for why we needed to do this. But I invented a tool where you could write logic for like how to manage your data, and you could run it in a test environment or a staging environment. You could run the same thing in a production environment. You could run the same thing like nightly and have like control so it didn't mess with production traffic. And so there's always this opportunity to try to like create a tool or a script or something that subsumes an already existing system that is just like too painful and makes it into a good abstraction and a good tool that people can use.
I'd like to throw in one thing of my own into the tower from my experience as an SRE. One of the concrete things I think one of the thing I'm most proud of for building when I was an SRE was this little tool that allowed people to input heuristics for what should or shouldn't be built in CI, and then just kind of have that applied automatically to the CI pipelines. And there are small things that you can enable. And I was not a manager at the time; I was an IC, and this kind of small thing that they enabled me to do as part of the work that drastically changed. I think it reduced like 40% build time or something like that, or 50% build time. It was insane. And it was just kind of a perspective from beneath, somebody who actually is in the trenches and trying to look at exactly what's going on. I distinctly remember this being a very, very fruitful experience for me as an engineer. But we do have a very interesting question coming up on the Q&A. Tomer, who is head of developer experience at Wix, a major site builder company. What are the metrics you use to measure the developer productivity team besides a satisfaction survey? And I think that would be the last question before we do kind of the final round. So if anybody has a question for that, what are the metrics for measuring, again, the developer productivity team and not the actual developer productivity experience? Ryan, Mark, Harish, Anton, anyone?
I don't have experience with developer productivity teams.
Right. Mark, Brian?
I think this is kind of where, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you could tie things like the deployment frequency, the lead time for changes, time to restore services. I mean, these are, again, based on the DORA report, are 4 metrics that at least we work with teams. So the DORA research, there's a report. Along with that, there's a tool. Now we take this tool and we actually work with customers. And when we work with customers, the tool works at a team level and at a business unit level. So to answer your question directly, we use that tool to actually gain out at the team level as well. And the 4 metrics that the tool kind of spits out are these 4, which is the deployment frequency, lead time, time changed failure. So those are the top 4 metrics, I would say, because it's kind of being tested and work with a bunch of customers on this. I can call out Deutsche Bank, Lumberjay. These are customers we've been working that with.
Right, gotcha. Okay, anybody else? Ryan, looks like you want to say something.
I would love to. I'll just do sort of the survey version here because this is a very big topic. So Tomer, to answer your question directly, for my organization, developer experience, in addition to satisfaction survey, we also have a bunch of metrics around the latency that tools take and the reliability effectively. And that's basically like, how slow is it? How painful is it? We do kind of distinguish between synchronous waiting time and asynchronous waiting time. That distinction matters a lot. If you're kind of kicking off a change set or a pull request and tests are running asynchronously versus if you're sitting there staring at a build. I also want to address what might be the subtext of your question, since you asked specifically about measuring the developer productivity team. That's something I care about too, since I am part of such a team. It's hard, I think, because holistically, I think this falls in the like there is no one metric kind of category that Harish was describing earlier. Holistically, I think we have to have a strategic bet that we're going to invest in developer productivity. So there has to be some air cover. And when we think about like what is the return we're getting for building tools and improving productivity, we have to have some kind of organizational buy-in, is kind of my opinion, around like the ratio of developer productivity investment versus other investment, or how this work will be rewarded at the company. And so I feel very fortunate to have a job where I feel like, you know, we have that context that I can operate in. But we have to kind of get it to a point where people aren't worrying day to day about whether they have to like micro optimize every project. I know this is not what you're saying is happening, but like that's what I worry can happen if we don't have the right like setup. Everyone's going to be like micro optimizing their own project for metrics that often don't actually serve the business purpose. So it's a tough and interesting topic. I could keep going on, Tom, but I won't.
Anybody else on the topic of developer productivity metrics?
I don't think I have anything else to add. I just like totally agree with Ryan, man. There's some things that are super easy to measure, and you know, we do those and we can show improvements, and we've got projects that drive down CI times, do these other things. And then there's other things that like, yep, it's, you know, you're making people happy and adding this user delight, and you know, you kind of get that in surveys and stuff like that. And you know, we consistently we consistently ask people like, are the tools here, how do they compare with previous companies? And we always, it's something like a very high measure of people like prefer our tools to wherever they came from. And you know, that has its own rewards around retention and other things, and continued investment into things that you can't easily translate into kind of dollars and cents or lines of code or any other sort of simplistic metric. So it's definitely a mix of things, and the organizational support, yeah, totally crucial.
I think that generally speaking, anything that is not concrete is often dismissed as a vanity metric. And that is something that specifically in the realm of developer productivity and developer happiness cannot happen. You just got to make sure that the metrics, even though they appear to the management above to be vanity metrics, they are not. They are concrete, important things that developers in the company care about and makes them stay happy and retained, which is a big problem nowadays. We only have 3 minutes left. So for those 3 minutes left, I want to leave a bit of time for my panelists to either put in any plug that they want to talk about, or just kind of randomly, you know, shoot the breeze. Anybody? Anton, anything to add kind of before we wrap this up?
I can add to the previous question that this is the same problem I have with my role at my company. Like how do you measure the satisfaction or like the KPIs or whatever metrics you have for developer relations? None.
Yes. Look at my title. This is what I do for a living. What Anton said, yes. Anything else? Anybody else? Something you want to plug in? Harish, anything you want to add to kind of finish off the conversation?
No, I mean, I think this was awesome. Like I heard a lot of, it's good to see that all of us are thinking along the same lines, and some, you know, we're all going through the same thing. So it was actually a really good panel. And thank you for having me and making me share these things. It was really good.
Thank you, Harish. Mark, final words. No, that's a bad thing, final words. Just like end of the end of the session. Yes.
No, I just yeah, it's always an interesting conversation. I've met with people who lead similar departments across. If there was somebody watching here who leads a similar department or is thinking of starting up one in their company, like hit me up on LinkedIn. I love to trade stories and insights and stuff around that as a whole. Like not every company invests in this, and we can learn a lot from each other on the best ways of supporting engineers at our respective organizations.
Yes, thank you very much. Ryan.
I'm going to steal Mark's line. Hit me up on LinkedIn if you're interested in these topics. And huge thanks to Mark, Harish, Anton, and Tom, of course. This is a great discussion. And Tom, I know you and the folks at LightRun put a whole bunch of work into organizing this behind the scenes. I'm extremely grateful for that. I know that's not something you want to dwell on in this panel because you love to get to the point, but it's really great work. Thank you so much for running this.
Thank you so much for coming on board. So I wanted to have some final words myself, not final, but end of session words. Again, I work for a company called LightRun. We do developer observability. It's a big way of saying something very easy. We add logs, metrics, and traces to live applications in real time. We have a free tier over there, not over there, lightrun.com/free. Please feel free to use it. This session is recorded and will be sent over to you via email, as well as a summary written by my amazing developer advocate, Shai Almog, who I try not to bother with weird DevRel KPIs because he is awesome and I love him. One extra thing kind of to finish this whole thing off, everything that you have asked, every Q&A that you have had here, we try and progress them between the sessions. So if you had the question and you didn't get it answered here, please come to the next session. We try and kind of make them into this one. The yak-shaving question was asked in a previous masterclass. We pushed it into this session as well. And again, thank you so much for staying all this time with us. Have a great rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. And panelists, you rock. Bye-bye. Goodbye to all.
Bye.
Thanks very much.